Cilantro is a fantastic addition to your garden, but it can be a real challenge to grow. I find cilantro is a bit of a contradiction. It's a short-lived annual herb that prefers colder temperatures, but it really is best in the kitchen in the summer when it goes so well with all the hot season crops. It can be hard to get plants established. It's a bit finicky, and when the tomatoes are finally ripe enough to make salsa, the cilantro is often all bolted and bitter. It's also best used fresh, and it's hard to preserve a surplus if you planted too much, although I do have some ideas for processing at the end of this video. So I'm going to talk about how we plan ahead to have fresh, plentiful cilantro all year round, including in the winter. And if you want to see more of what we're doing in the restaurant culinary garden, hit subscribe. So first things first, the seed. The cilantro seed is actually coriander seed, which you would recognize from your kitchen. Both cilantro and coriander are used in cuisines from all over the world, but they both have really different taste profiles and flavors. So we're just talking about growing cilantro for the leaves in this video. So there's a lot of different varieties of cilantro that you might see when you're buying seed. A lot of them have to do with their bolt tolerance, so how slow bolting you'll see listed on some of the labels. Some of it might have to do with the height or the growth habit or the taste, but really there's a few types. I often have planted Calypso, which is slow to bolt. I've also just planted cilantro seeds from the shelf in my kitchen. It had pretty low germination rates, but it did work. Cilantro is definitely best grown by direct seeding. It has a taproot, so it really doesn't like being transplanted, and it'll undergo transplant shock. So that means when you put it into the ground, it will just basically stop growing or grow very, very, very slowly. Last year, I grew some in soil blocks early on in the spring. This is the cilantro here, so 2 rows of cilantro. And every second bunch, this bunch was when I transplanted, and then this is what I seeded. So at the same time as I did this, I also seeded little clumps of cilantro. And it's interesting because this has hardly done anything. Here's a transplanted bunch, here's a seeded bunch, here's a transplanted bunch. So I would say transplanting them out in early April, which is like almost 2 months ago now, really made no difference, and waiting for them to come up from seed probably would have been a better bet. So it wasn't really worth the extra effort of growing the transplants and then putting them in the garden. I would have been better off just direct seeding. So that's what I'm going to do this year. You can plant cilantro in rows or in clumps. The seeds can be about 1 centimeter apart, and they need to be lightly covered because they need dark to germinate, but just lightly covered. You want to keep it well watered until it germinates in a week or more, and the ideal germination temp is around 18 to 21 degrees Celsius, so 65 to 70 Fahrenheit. So you want to start seeding them around your last frost date when the soil temps have warmed up. If you want to get a head start, you could warm up the soil in a bed by putting a piece of plastic over it or some row cover. Even though cilantro plants are cold hardy, to get the seeds to germinate, it really wants a fairly warm temperature. Soil that's light, well drained, not wet, pretty standard for any herb or vegetable plant. And now the hard part is don't plant too many seeds at once. This is a mistake I've made year after year. If you're planting in rows, maybe just think about planting a quarter or half of the row space now, and then plant another section later. So the reason you don't want to plant all your cilantro at once is because it's considered a short-lived plant. So it's going to bolt, it's going to produce flowers and then seeds, and then it's going to die when the days start to get long in the summer and when the temperatures are warm in the summer. This is programmed into the plant, and once it starts to bolt, there isn't really anything you can do to change it. The leaves really start to change texture. They go from sort of a thick, typical cilantro-looking leaf to sort of thin and fern-like, and they often become bitter, and there's not as much of it to harvest either. So if we look at a chart to make sure that there's cilantro all year, so I'm going to start with the seeding dates, and then I'm going to harvest around 6 weeks after planting, and then I'm going to expect to harvest from these plants for about a month before it bolts and I pull it out. So you can see if I decide to plant on May 1st, I'm going to harvest June 15th, 6 weeks away, and then I'm going to pull it out July 15th. But then I've got my second succession coming. So I've got some that I planted June 1st. I'm going to harvest that July 15th, which is when I'm pulling the previous cilantro bed. And then I've got that till August 15th. And then you can see if I do it July 1st, August 1st, I've got cilantro going right until the frost. And that's sort of an estimation, but it gives you an idea of the kind of thing you can do. I'm probably going to plant cilantro actually every 2 weeks instead of every month, like is demonstrated here. But it gives you an idea of what kind of timing you want and where you want to put it in your garden. And you can put this in the same bed. You can actually plant seeds among the plants that are already there that you know you're going to pull out, or you can plant them in a different spot in your garden. What are other ways we can keep cilantro plants happy and healthy in the summer? So one is pick where you plant them, using the sunny beds in spring and then shady in the summer. So early on, I'm going to plant in the first places that warm up and where my heat-loving crops aren't ready to go yet. Cilantro is great in the understory of taller summer crops like beans or tomatoes or cucumbers that you might have growing up vertical support. So then you have some bare soil underneath and you can put clumps of cilantro. We also seeded this cilantro. It came up and it was growing, and I actually pulled out all the spinach around it and left it here and planted the tomatoes among it because it doesn't take up too much space. Also, keeping the cilantro plants well watered and mulch can keep the soil temperature down. And really the soil temperature is as important as the air temperature. So if you can cool your soil, then that helps keep it from bolting. And cilantro will go right until the end of the season. It's frost hardy to below 0. So I've had cilantro plants that are frozen in the garden come back to life when the sun comes out. And light frosts are fine for it, especially if it's covered with row cover. And another thing you can do about bolting is you can just leave some plants to bolt. It's a beautiful flower that attracts all kinds of beneficial insects. You can let the seeds go until they're ready to harvest, which will take probably another month. And then harvest the plant when about half the seeds are dry, pull it out of the garden, put it in a paper bag, let it dry completely. I find it's hard to save cilantro seeds because as you're letting it dry on the plant, they're dropping it all over the garden. And so you end up with self-seeded cilantro as well. In the past, we've had a lot of cilantro self-seeding, and it's always a good indication of when it's ready to germinate, when the soil is warm enough, when it's at its optimum temperature. So you can let these volunteer seedlings come up. They might not come up in the right place, but they'll come up at the right time. So maybe that's a signal for you to plant cilantro seeds, or maybe it's just a couple of cilantro plants somewhere on the margins that you can just let go and harvest from. I find it's not worth it to try and move cilantros that are self-seeded in the garden. They don't like being transplanted, like I said. So at that stage, either let them grow where they are or just pull them up like weeds. So when you're harvesting, you can cut the leaves. You can either just chop the whole plant right to the ground and then let it regrow. It takes about 2 weeks to do that. You can also just selectively pick leaves off of the plants if you have a big clump of them. That works really well. And cilantro is best when it's a little bit bigger than this, and you can harvest the leaves really easily. And often I'll just pull it straight out of the ground and then keep that in the fridge. So that's an easier way than cutting it. I find it lasts longer because it has this nice taproot on it. If you put that on like a piece of moistened paper towel, it'll actually stay perky and stay straight for a couple days. It'll maintain some of that water. And when using in cooking, you can also use the stems. They have the same flavor and they're pretty tender and juicy. So just chop the whole thing up. And to preserve it, it's a tough one. Drying does not preserve the flavor. And I don't really find that freezing does that well either. The best bet that we found is to blend it into salsa verde or other sauces that can be jarred or frozen. Flavors are integrated into the sauces when they're made, and then it's in a form where it can stay tasty and delicious for many months. So we make salsa verde that we put in the freezer, and we make salsa that we put in jars. That does take more processing time up front, and it doesn't fill the gap in the one beautiful cilantro sprig that's placed on a dish for garnish, but that's what microgreens are for. So the other thing that we do is we grow microgreen cilantro over the winter. So I'm using a 10-20 tray here, a shallow one for microgreens, filling it with just a ProMix potting soil, and then I'm putting, in this case, it was 30 grams of cilantro seed into a container soaked for 24 hours. So then I spread those out on the ProMix and I cover it with a container, just another one just to exclude the light until it's germinated. So I'm going to check on this every day or so. Then once that's done, I'm going to pull it off and I'm going to put it under the lights. And you want to put it right up close to the lights that you have, maybe propped up with another bin, and then let it grow. I find it's not the fastest growing microgreen compared to radishes or pea shoots, but it is delicious. It has all of the cilantro flavor and all of that beautiful cilantro look that is just really like iconic and really nice on a chili or a noodle bowl that we have on the menu. So thanks for watching. Give this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more like it of the culinary garden this summer.